Hey guys, this is a quick review of the bouncing ball assignment using the more advanced rig. So if you guys remember, we have this rig. I'll come here as frame 14. So this control right here, we're going to set it and forget it. We're going to set our global scale and we're going to roughly place our rig in our scene file. This control right here, this blue one, is the control that we're going to use for translating the ball through space. So this control has keys on the Y translation, bouncing up and down, on the Z translation as it moves through the scene in Z, forward motion, and that's pretty much it. It doesn't have keys on anything else. The only thing that we're manipulating with this blue control is the translation up and down and forward. Now for the rotation, we're going to put the keys for the rotation on the red control, which is literally named the rotation control. So at frame 1, it's set to 0, and at frame 37, I've set it to about a full rotation at 365. Actually, let's just round this out to 365. And it's a linear curve. So now we've just separated out the two different pieces of motion onto those two controls. Now we want to add squash and stretch. So I'm going to go here to frame 13 so we can see the squash and stretch controls. So we have the top one, and remember we're only going to manipulate it in Y to squash it up and down. We also have a bottom squash and stretch down here, which we can use. And then we have this green ring, which will allow us to rotate the axis of the squash and stretch so that we can shape our squash and stretch to emphasize the arc that our ball is traveling in. So let's go ahead and add our squash and stretch. I'm going to select all, I'm going to hit Q so I can select all three of the green controls. And now that I have them selected, I'm going to come down here to our script editor and I'm going to make a button out of those three selections by highlighting it in the script editor, and then I'm going to middle mouse button and I'm going to drag it up to our shelf, and it is a Mel script. So now I'm going to close our script editor and then I'm going to right click this new button we've created on the shelf and I'm going to say edit, and then I'm going to go to shelves. You can see it's selecting those three controls. I'm going to go to shelves. Since it's the last thing on the shelf, it's highlighted. So now I can add a label to it. So I'm going to call this SQ for squash. We could change the color here if we want to. I'm going to leave it white. I'm going to say save all shelves. And so now I have this button right here. So now I want to set keys on my squash and stretch. I'm going to set, we know that it lands on the ground here at frame 13, so I'm just going to go ahead and set a key on those controls here at 13 and at 1. And I believe it's back on the, its height here at frame 25, so I'll set one here at 25. And then it gets back down to the ground here at frame 37. So I'll just go ahead and set a key so we have one on all the channels for those three controls right here. So right before it lands, I'm going to take the top one and hit W so I have my translation manipulator, and we know that it's going to be its most stretched right before it hits the ground. So I'm going to pull this up. When it hits the ground, it's going to be its most squashed, so I'm going to push this down. And when it goes back up in the air, I'm going to zero this out. Okay, so if we're looking at our Y translation curve, this is what it looks like right now. Now at the top of the arc here, we want it to be zeroed back out, and probably until like around frame 9, 8. I'm going to hit a key here and I'm going to zero this out. it wouldn't really be stretching yet until it gets close to hitting the ground. Okay? So now we're going to start manipulating the bottom controller, because we want it to also be stretched as it launches off the ground. So at this point, I'm going to pull it down to its most stretched. And then when we get about halfway up to the top of the arc, I'm going to go ahead and zero this out so that it's a sphere, a perfect sphere again. Okay, so let's do that again for the next bounce down. So I think for the top one, at this point, we would want to save a key here so that it's still completely round, but also for the top, for everything, we want it to be 0. And then right before it hits the ground, we're going to want this top one to be stretched way out. Right here, I think it should be 0. So it's super stretched out. When it hits the ground, it's squished back down. And then in the very next frame, it's going to be zeroed back out. So now the only thing that we're missing, if we back up, and we look at this from our perspective window from the side, you'll see that the squash and stretch is not really conforming to the shape of the arc. So that's where we're going to use the green ring to point our squash and stretch in the direction of the arc. So let me select just the green ring. And here, right before it lands, we want to angle it towards the direction it was coming from. So at like about frame 8, we could probably, no, let's go to frame 7 and we'll zero it out here. But as it comes down, we want to angle it so that it's in the shape of the arc. And then as it launches back up, we need to angle it towards where it's going. When we get to the top of the arc, here at 25, we want it to be zeroed back out. And then as it's coming into the next one, we want to angle it, point it in the direction that it came from. Zero it out. And then as it was going back up, if it was continuing to bounce, we'd angle it in the other direction. So if I just isolate that curve by selecting it up here, I should only see the X rotation curve here. That's what it looks like. And that's what we should have. So again, let's take a peek at just the green. That's what the squash and stretch curve looks like. And for the bottom one, this is what it looks like. So I hope this helps, and I'll see you guys in class.